America armed and dangerous.
There are now some 40 million handguns
Firearm
in this country.
injuries represent an epidemic in the United
of
States.
gun violence.
Join us in this campaign to reduce gun violence.
The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun,
another mass shooting
is
in America.
a good guy with
shooting
a gun.
rampage.
316 people are shot every single day.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These are the words etched into the Constitution on which the precedent for legal gun ownership is set. This living document protects the right to bear arms for most Americans with few exceptions. Because of these legal protections and historical gun ownership in the United States, 32% of adult Americans own firearms, with many owning far more than one. Currently, the United States is the only country in the world with more guns than people. To many Americans, this is great. It represents the freedom of Americans and the ability to fight a tyrannical government. However, to others, the shocking statistic, along with high gun homicide rates, are proof that the gun ownership system in the United States needs to be changed. This hot-button issue splits right through the political parties in the United States, with Republicans generally advocating the pro-gun position, and with Democrats historically arguing in opposition. This topic is so divisive that in many cases, voicing your opinion either way can alienate you from voters. With the debate as heated as it is, many people prefer to stay away from the issue. However, with how integral it is to the political landscape in the United States, it is important to understand the arguments on both sides.
With this being such a hot-button issue, both left and right go back and forth on this topic constantly. The conservative side views it as this. They see that gun ownership is what will bring down crime rate. You know, the old saying that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That someone on the scene of a crime who has a gun could stop a potential intruder or someone who's trying to hurt you. The way that the left looks at this is that people who have guns are more likely to start mass shootings than people who don't have guns. There are very few issues in this country that take up such a heated debate as gun control, and both sides, left and right, have validity to their arguments. From the conservative side, we see the basis of the argument being the Second Amendment. It is something written into this living document that gives every American the right to own a gun if they so choose. Many Americans do choose to own firearms. In fact, in the United States, there are more firearms than people living in this country. Then, we have the issue of self-defense, that every American in this country has the right to protect themselves if an intruder or an attacker comes into their home to try to harm themselves or their family. In fact, 62% of gun owners cite self-defense as the reason for owning a weapon. Lastly, we have the idea that a good guy with a gun is the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun in an open environment. Imagine you're in a public setting and a possible mass shooting starts. The attacksman draws his firearm, and someone there who is also carrying pulls out his weapon and neutralizes the threat. They would be able to neutralize the threat much quicker than the time it would take for law enforcement to get there and stop the threat. As journalist John Stroessel would attest, see, this is how many Americans view this issue. They see gun ownership as not only a right to themselves, but a right to their fellow Americans to protect them and everyone around them. Now, as for people on the left, they view this issue totally differently. They see these guns as a way to kill people, and that's it. When you look at these mass atrocities in this country, there is no easier way to commit them than with guns, especially guns like assault rifles and AR-15s. We look at the great mass shootings in the past couple years in this country, like the Vegas shooting, the Uvalde, or the Parkland shooting. All these events were committed with assault rifles that were able to kill dozens of people in seconds. These guns today have large magazines that are able to shoot hundreds of rounds in a matter of seconds. In a matter of minutes, hundreds of people can be dead. That brings us to the basis of why the Second Amendment is seen as outdated by people on the left. Whereas people on the right champion the Second Amendment as the reason for their gun ownership, people on the left think it's pointless at this point. They see the Second Amendment as something that was written 250 years ago by men who could not even have envision what guns would look like today. Back in 1776, when the Constitution was signed, the most popular weapon was a musket. Something that if you wanted to load it, you had to drop the bullet in, drop the gunpowder in, load it, and then you could shoot one bullet, and then you had to do it again. You'd have to do that over and over again just to fire a few shots. And the likelihood that those shots would even take a life were very low. The guns were incredibly inaccurate. Now today, with these guns, these automatic weapons that are incredibly accurate and fire mass amounts of bullets, the amendment is seen as completely outdated. Next, we have the issue of suicide rates. Suicide rates in states in this country with higher gun ownership have higher suicide rates. More people in this country that have access to guns are more likely to kill themselves. Not only more likely to attempt suicide, but the suicide itself is more likely to be effective. Instead of seeking help, instead of going to parents, friends, or anyone who is willing to listen, they see an easy way out as a gun. And finally, the last thing I want to look at is background checks. People on the left are begging and pleading with politicians on the right and Americans all over in this country for some commonality in background checks, finding a way to determine the kind of people who should have the right to own a gun and the people who shouldn't. Stricter background checks so that things like AR-15s and any gun for that matter doesn't end up in the hands of people who are mentally unstable, who might break and might cause mass amounts of damage to the people in this country. Now, many Americans are trying to find commonality between this hot-button issue, and many Americans agree on this. Like 84% of Americans believe there should be some form of universal background check when people go to buy weapons. Another 75% of Americans believe that we should raise the minimum age from 18 to 21 for people trying to buy AR-15 style weapons. And finally, 63% of Americans believe that the age should be raised again from 18 to 21 in buying any type of gun. Now, politicians on the right and lobbyists are pushing very hard against that last statistic I gave to you, as they cite that it infringes upon our Second Amendment right to own a gun. And as the left sees it, we are getting guns out of the hands of people who are too young and inexperienced to make the proper decisions and safety precautions for people who own firearms. Now, in commonality in terms of the left leaning towards the right, we see two major things. The first is in self-defense. Left-leaning politicians and left-leaning policies have no intent of taking away people's right to self-defense. People's right to own a small firearm, thing like a pistol, or something that can be kept in a drawer in a house or an apartment, that can be used to defend yourself and your family against intruders. That's completely fine. No one on the left wants to take that away from you. The other is hunting. Hunting rifles are for sport. Hunting is part of a great American tradition, where families will go out together on weekends, the father with the son, or the daughter, can go out hunt and make memories together. Using these hunting rifles is completely okay. They're much less powerful than AR-15s and other guns like it, and they're used for what is basically fun. Unfortunately, where we see these two worlds again split apart is when the right becomes afraid of gun restriction. People on the right are afraid that if the most minimal amount of gun restriction occurs, that it could snowball out of control. The left politicians could continue to berate Congress, the Senate, and the White House with policies that would limit gun access. And eventually, in 50 years, people are afraid they won't have any right to a gun. That no one in this country will be allowed to own a gun, because eventually the policies allow them. Though, if people on the right and the left have found more common ground, they would eventually be able to work out their differences and find a way to fix the major issues in this country. That we can solve the difference between ending mass shootings and allowing people their Second Amendment right to defend themselves and own a gun. It's a very hot topic issue, and without debates, we would never be able to find common ground against each other. So, there will always be a debate until one day both sides agree.
ਰੱਖ ਲੈ ਪੱਲੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੁਖੜਾ ਲੁਕਾ